Welcome everyone, this is On This Restart, and this time we're talking about Breath of the Wild 2. We finally got a gameplay reveal during Nintendo's E3 2021 Direct. That teaser trailer that we got, the second teaser trailer, there's a whole bunch of information there that we're going to be dissecting and talking about in this video. There are several theories that have surfaced from this one trailer already, so we're going to be going over all the different theories and talking about them and suggesting what they may mean in this video. Now, before we jump to things, let me very quickly talk about my social media. You may see a few different things here on screen. You can check that all out. It is linked in the description below, and of course, if you like what you're seeing here, you can subscribe. So the first theory we're going to be discussing here is what is going on with Link's hand. From the initial trailer, we saw that there was this green light glow, perhaps the Zonai magic or what have you, consuming Link's hand, and that it would be related to the different powers we have through the game. It would be the replacement for the Sheikah Slate, which we did not see at all in the initial trailer, nor have we seen it in the new trailer. However, we did see Link using different powers all throughout the trailer. We saw him do some sort of dive up into the sky, which would allow him to actually go through ground and surface through it, like actually phase through it like some sort of like ethereal water or what have you. But then we also saw him use a power that allowed him to reverse time. He was actually able to stop a spiked steel metal ball and send it backwards through time reversal. And we also saw him with a shield that was also containing some sort of flamethrower on it. That part might not be related to Link's hand, but the point is, we have seen Link's hand consumed, and it is leading to a whole bunch of new power-ups here. But what's interesting about the trailer is that it's not this green glow like in the first trailer that we see consume his hand, but it's actually malice. It's Ganondorf's malice that is consuming his hand. There's a shriek that goes on. It seems painful. And later into the trailer, we see Link's hand. It's dark. It has these different adornments upon it. It doesn't look normal. It doesn't look like his hand anymore. Was it burned? Was it destroyed or corrupted by the malice? Was it lost entirely? And there's some sort of like mechanical hand replacing it. We're not entirely sure exactly what it is, but it's very clear that something very different and clearly painful happened to Link's hand. And it seems like it actually has led to him being fairly damaged, and perhaps there being some sort of time skip here, because when we look through the trailer, Link is found in this other higher up realm in the sky with these different sky islands, but his hair is far longer, he has a different look, and yes, his hand is different. But we even see one shot that shows Link laying down and the hand sort of glowing with all the different parts upon it. Perhaps someone helped him or saved him after that initial meetup with Ganondorf from what we saw in the first trailer. It seems like Ganondorf caused a lot of damage to both Link and Zelda in Hyrule when he was resurrected, and perhaps some time has passed, someone somewhere saved Link and perhaps transported him to the skies above where he was treated. It took some time, and that's why we see him more wild looking with his hair. And he has this special hand now that probably took some healing and enhancements from this special magic that we're seeing. But on the note of the damage that was done by Ganondorf, yes, that is almost certainly Ganondorf in the trailer. He has the Gerudo garments, he still has the gem on his head. In the first trailer we saw that hole in his chest, which is linking to Twilight Princess and the malice coming from it. In the actual legend for Breath of the Wild, it is discussed that Calamity Ganon came to be from years and cycles of failings trying to take over Hyrule. Calamity Ganon comes from Ganondorf. Ganondorf is a source, and we see in the initial trailer malice coming from this corpse. Ganondorf is a source, and we see in the new trailer he seems to be the one behind Hyrule Castle rising up into the sky with all that malice erupting from the ground. But we've already discussed somewhat that Ganondorf was a cause for a great deal of damage that goes beyond just Hyrule Castle rising from the ground and malice erupting everywhere. Link's hand was injured, Zelda was lost, but we actually also see that it seems like the malice might have a greater impact on the creatures in Hyrule, because what you may notice, the bokoblins have far larger horns. Why would they have far larger horns now? Are they a different breed? Potentially. But they look very similar. They're on top of their typical sort of outpost, but the outpost is being controlled or moved around by a giant stone talus in the same sort of Hyrule environment we saw from before. It seems like the same actual breed, but rather they have bigger horns, potentially because the influence of Ganondorf and his malice is far stronger now that he's been resurrected. So what could this suggest for other creatures and enemies we saw in Breath of the Wild when they return? Perhaps they could be bigger and stronger and have more powers as well. I can only imagine what they could do with a Lynel. If that sort of transformation we saw for just a simple base enemy from bokoblins with the giant horns, what will Lynels look like? There's some serious potential here for some far more powerful versions of the initial enemies we saw in Breath of the Wild. But sticking to the subject here of this damage that Ganondorf has caused, what happened to Zelda? Because with the rising of the castle, there was quite a bit of seismic activity, things were broken, and there were holes created, and we see Zelda fall down one. Does this mean that Zelda is the damsel in distress again? She was captured by Ganondorf, and that's pretty much it. Link is gonna spend the entirety of the game trying to get to Ganondorf to save her. Based on most previous Zelda games, that seems like a decent bet. At the very least, it seems like it's fair to say that the majority of the gameplay throughout the sequel to Breath of the Wild is gonna be about Link, and Zelda will not be a part of it. She will not be a companion character, she will not be playable. That's what it seems like the trailer is suggesting. In the first trailer, it almost looked like Link had a chance to save her, but in the second one, it seems to confirm that we lose her. However, there are some potential curveballs here. One, Ganondorf is raising Hyrule Castle. I'm gonna assume that he's gonna be in it, and it's now gonna become Ganon's castle or Ganondorf's castle. But Zelda falls down a hole. Maybe that hole is still somehow in the castle, or she's grabbed and brought into the castle, and she's again a damsel in distress that Link needs to save at the end of the game. But maybe she falls elsewhere. Maybe she isn't quite captured by Ganondorf, but something else happens to her. And maybe you still do communicate with her throughout the game. Maybe there's still a story there for Zelda as well, and we see that throughout the sequel to Breath of the Wild. So there's still some potential curveballs here. It isn't necessarily the case 100% that Zelda is in Hyrule Castle being imprisoned by this resurrected zombie Ganondorf suspended high up into the sky for Hyrule. There could be some curveballs. But let's get back to some of the changes we've seen for Hyrule. So, yes, Hyrule Castle has risen up, but there's also a lot more in the sky now. It almost seems like this is an entirely other realm high above the clouds. If you look throughout the different shots we've seen, there's clouds everywhere, and there's all these different sorts of islands in the sky with these different yellow trees and this Greek-like architecture littered throughout. There's something interesting about this environment. There are definitely some very serious Skyward Sword vibes here. It appears that our theory was correct, that there would be a lot more travel in the sky, expanding upon the verticality of Hyrule. That part of our theory was true. But here's another consideration here. With all of these islands in the sky, how will Link be getting to them? Well, this goes back to our theory. What if we do see Loftwings return? With this big emphasis on Skyward Sword and it telling us the history of Hyrule and how we're seeing a lot of Skyward Sword-like nods and implications in the sequel trailer, the second one of it, maybe Loftwings will return, and that's how we'll be able to explore these different environments in the sky. There could actually be sky mounts. But something to consider here is that if we did have Loftwings or something similar, that might make traversal and platforming throughout these different sky islands to be quite easy. Maybe they don't want it to be easy, at least from the very beginning. So maybe you don't get Loftwings for the beginning, or maybe if you do, they are quite unruly and you can only use them for so long, and later into the game you can find more and use them for more or maybe something else. It's also possible there will be other sort of mechanics used to get to these different islands. We already mentioned the dive up. That seems to be a power that's related to Link's hand. Well, that allows you to dive up and go through sky islands and surface at the top of their floors or whatever you're sort of phasing through. So maybe that is the replacement for Rivali's Gale, and it has a lot more verticality potential there. And actually, when we take a look at the shot right before we see Link sort of diving upwards, there's this like small little pool of water that is sort of coming out, and it seems to be connected to this dive up ability that Link has. But what's interesting is that where this water is, it looks to be of a similar terrain and grass that we've seen in Hyrule Field. So could this piece of water be from the ground and not the sky realm? Maybe the sky area is kind of like a second world. Second worlds have been a thing in different Zelda games before, like the Twilight Realm or the Dark Realm or Low World and such. So maybe there is something going on here with that. Maybe this dive up is actually Link jumping from the ground to the sky. What's interesting is, yes, you can actually see different areas from Hyrule high up in the sky. For example, you can see the scary saplings in this one shot right here. So you can clearly see Hyrule below this sky realm, but when we look at the final shot in the trailer, we cannot really see any islands in the sky from that point. So perhaps the clouds cover it up. Perhaps there's some sort of teleportation needed to actually access this point of the world. Maybe these ruins, these islands, are related to the civilization we see in the skies in Skyward Sword. But perhaps the canon reason explaining why we don't see them in any other Zelda game or even in Breath of the Wild is related to some sort of magic or cloud covering we see, which is also why we can't see them in the final shot, which also might make sense from a sort of performance perspective as well, because if the game all of a sudden has to load up everything in the ground world but also in the sky, that could become a little bit challenging. That may still be the case, it's hard to say for sure, but there might be some sort of clear differentiation between the islands in the sky and the ground level of Hyrule. Ultimately, I do want them to be connected, so I think that might be the end goal here, but still, it looks like that dive up could potentially be some sort of teleportation from the ground. Since we're already discussing the sky, let's talk about what I think might be another overworld boss, but an overworld boss we see in this sky realm. Now, it's this mechanical looking creature with these hands that are hovering below, and it even has like these like flowery little like ovally things above for what seem to be the shoulders. We've actually seen this shape before in different parts of this sky realm here. Could there be a connection? Could this perhaps be some sort of ancient technology of the people that used to rule this sky realm? Potentially. Maybe this potential overworld boss and ancient technology we're seeing could also be related to Link's hand. We do see a similar sort of like green glowing like energy in the core of this mechanical like creature, similar to what we see from Link's hand and in the initial sequel trailer. So maybe there's something going on here. Maybe that's where this civilization is from. Perhaps this is where the long lost tribe of the Zonai have escaped to. Potentially. But maybe it's not the Zonai. Maybe it's related to the Sheikah. If we take a look at the shield that Link is wearing on his back as he's exploring the Sky Islands, it almost looks like that's somewhat of a changed around Sheikah symbol. What if the civilization that is in the sky is related to some sort of subgroup of Sheikah? Instead of being guided and tested by these mummified Sheikahs all throughout the game, maybe there's another tribe of still surviving Sheikahs that have developed their own culture and tendencies and rituals and magic that are being used to help Link all throughout the game. After all, we already noted that someone seems to save Link. He is on some sort of weird table with the glowy Zonai magical hand thing. Again, we assume it's Zonai, we don't actually know. Regardless, it's pretty clear that there is some sort of ancient civilization in the sky, and we will be learning about it. And it seems to be quite vast. There's even one shot where we see a very unique structure that seems to be different from everything else around, and conveniently, there are quite a few clouds covering it up. Could this perhaps be one of our first looks at a traditional style dungeon? We didn't have any traditional style dungeons in Breath of the Wild, but a lot of the speculation has been that perhaps we could see a return of dungeons of that sort of style in Breath of the Wild too. But continuing with that idea of traditional dungeons, there's this other clip where we see Link in some sort of cave-like environment where he's combating this strange creature with a flamethrower. There weren't too many cave-like areas in the initial Breath of the Wild. Perhaps there will be a lot more cave areas as potentially implied with the initial trailer when Link and Zelda are exploring underground. And perhaps by exploring these cave-like areas, we will discover some of the older dungeons we've seen throughout Zelda history, like the Ancient Cistern or the Forest Temple or Arbiter's Grounds. We actually technically see Arbiter's Grounds in the initial Breath of the Wild, it's just all deep under a whole bunch of sand. So if we are going to be exploring underground, it would make sense that maybe we could see some of these dungeons. But going back to that one clip we see in the new trailer, just beyond this weird like creature on the ceiling, we can see a bit of a pedestal. Perhaps if Link defeats this creature, a chest will appear. Kind of like how it worked in previous Zelda dungeons. Maybe. But let's now transition to the final point I want to talk about for this video. And that's the release timing here. So it has been confirmed, Breath of the Wild 2 is not coming out this year, it is coming out in 2022. The game started development back in 2017. This is bound to be a very, very big game, especially considering that they started off the foundation with Breath of the Wild, and we've now seen confirmation that we will still be able to explore that same world from Breath of the Wild, but obviously with lots of changes. So Nintendo's bound to have put a whole bunch of new content and ideas into this game that's very exciting, and yes, for those who have been following me, I do plan on having a dubious food since I was wrong about my prediction related to the release timing. But continuing on with this idea of the release timing, when will the game actually come out? They say they are aiming for 2022, but when in 2022, assuming it isn't delayed again? I personally do not think it's March 2022, as a lot of people were predicting before we got this trailer. It doesn't seem like we're that close. We just got about 90 seconds of a trailer during the Direct, and there was no treehouse gameplay at all, and there's still so much we don't know about the game. Conceivably, there could be a larger, bigger event later this year where they blow out Breath of the Wild 2, perhaps after the release for Skyward Sword, and it ends up being a quite nice lead up into March 2022. Potentially that's the case, but the way things were worded, the way they sort of showed things off, it doesn't feel like Breath of the Wild 2 is right around the corner. If Breath of the Wild 2 was going to make it out by the fiscal year, wouldn't they have used it to celebrate the Zelda 35th anniversary, which Eiji Aonuma told us that they have no games planned to come out for the anniversary beyond what's already been announced. If they were going to have Breath of the Wild 2 come out then, maybe they would have had more games or things coming out to sort of celebrate the 35th anniversary leading to the close of the fiscal year, similar to how they handled 3D All-Stars. But that's not what Nintendo's doing here. And usually, before a big Zelda release, they get a big blowout at the E3 prior. We did not see a blowout for Breath of the Wild 2 during this E3. However, these are still different times. The pandemic impacted a lot of things in terms of how we're getting our information and when we're seeing it and such. So maybe Nintendo's gonna do things a little bit differently, and maybe there still could be a blowout event, and maybe Breath of the Wild 2 does come out March 2022. But I feel like that's a best case scenario. Maybe that's when we see Switch Pro finally come out. But just based off of everything we're seeing right now, I really feel like at this point, maybe we should start expecting it to be coming out a little bit later. So I'm thinking holiday 2022 at this point, but if it comes out sooner, obviously, I'll be very, very happy about that. But that's the speculation, the theories that have been going on from that initial trailer, from what we know so far. But what do you guys think? Have you guys noticed anything else interesting from the E3 2021 teaser trailer, this gameplay reveal? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways, everyone, this is Honest Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.